Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be doing day 4 of Advent of Code 2022. You'll see a time lapse of me solving the puzzles, and then I'll be explaining them in detail along with my thought process. As always, my code will be in the GitHub repository, which is linked to in the description. And another thing, if you would like to join my private leaderboard, we're going to try something new. I'm going to link the code in the description for you to join. You can join by clicking on leaderboard and then private leaderboard, and you'll have a space to enter the code there. Only 200 people can join, so I don't know how it's going to work out, but let's give it a shot. Okay, and now you'll get to see a time lapse of me solving the puzzles. Hi everyone, so I didn't place on the leaderboard today, that's okay, but I did get kind of close. I got rank 117 on part 1 and 235 on part 2, so definitely getting better, or at least there's an upward trend here. So the problem was that for part 2, I didn't check my answer against the sample inputs, and it turns out I had actually read the problem incorrectly. So we'll talk about part 2 soon, but the lesson here is just to read the problem carefully and actually do what is asked for. So now let's look at the problem. Day 4, camp cleanup. Basically what's happening here is we're moving away from the beach, so we have to clean up our camp. Every elf is assigned a range to clean up within the camp, and where these ranges are of sections, because the camp is numbered, has a number of sections that are all integers, and each elf is responsible for a range of sections to clean up. Now all the elves are paired up, so in this example there are 6 pairs. Every pair contains 2 elves, and what we're asked to find is a number of pair assignments where there are duplicates, and the other elf cleans up C to D. The other case is where one elf cleans C to D, and that's within the elf that cleans from A to B. So this problem was pretty nice because once you see the input format, it's pretty easy to guess what they represent. So here's what I did first of all. I just went through the input and split up by new line characters to get all the lines. Then I iterated through all the lines. Since the input is formatted like this, we can just go through every line and then split by this comma character to get each of the 2 parts. Each part represents one elf, where the line is a pair. And then we go through both of those parts and split by this dash or minus character, which separates the range bounds of that elf. So for example, in this first case, elf 1 is going to clean up ranges 2 to 4, or sections 2 to 4, and elf 2 is going to clean up sections 6 to 8. What we're doing in this line is using some fancy list comprehension, so let's just break it down. Elves is going to be a list of 2 elements. Those elements are going to be strings. So for example, it might be 2 to 4 and then 6 to 8 are going to be the 2 strings that are contained within this variable elves. So we iterate through both of those using Python list comprehension, which is great. And then for each of those parts, we're going to split that range by this hyphen character to get the first and the second half inside a list with 2 elements, and then we're going to map both of those elements to integers because we have to work with integers. And then what I did for convenience was just make the ranges A to B and C to D. Just for ease of typing, this is probably not the best practice, but that's what I did. So that's what you have here. Elf 1 is going to be the range from A to B, elf 2 is going to be the range from C to D. We want to know whether one range is fully contained within the other. So how we can check for that is, in case 1, A is going to be greater than or equal to C, and B is going to be less than or equal to D. In case 2, A is going to be less than or equal to C, and D is going to be less than or equal to D. I should probably write them in the correct order. So that's exactly what we check for in our code. We check if the endpoints of the first range are such that the start range of the first elf is before the start range of the second elf, and the end range of the first elf is greater than the end range of the second elf. This means that the first elf's range fully contains the second elf's range. And then we just flip it around to get the second case where the second elf's range fully contains the first elf's. Now, if both of those conditions are true, or either of those conditions are true, then one range contains the other, and we increment our answer by 1 to denote that one assignment pair satisfies this condition. So that's it for part 1. Let's look at part 2. Now we just have to tell whether one assignment pair contains an overlap within those 2 ranges, and then just tally those up. Now this looks a little bit different. So we have a couple of cases. The first that I considered was like this, where we have A to B overlapping C to D like that. In this case, we can check that C lies within the range A to B, and this just is the check A is less than or equal to C is less than or equal to B. The great thing about Python is that you can actually do comparisons like this and it becomes valid. In other languages, this will not work, but in Python it does, which is great. The other case that I considered was, what was it? D lies within this range, so A to B and C to D. All we have to check for here is just the same thing, but for D. So we have to check that A is less than or equal to D is less than or equal to B. So those are the two things I checked. I forgot to check the original case where A is where the first else range is fully contained within the second else range, or the second else range is fully contained within the first else range. But as it turns out, there's something actually much easier that we can do. And if again our ranges are A to B and C to D, then all we have to check, instead of checking if they do overlap, we check if they don't overlap, and then we negate that. So the only way that these two ranges don't overlap is if we have this, so if they don't overlap, or we have this. So all we have to do to check for either of these two cases is one comparison. In this first case, if B is less than or equal to C, if B is strictly less than C, then this condition holds. And in the second case, if D is less than A, then this condition holds. Basically, this is just checking if the maximum of the first range is less than the minimum of the second range. In that case, they definitely don't overlap. In the second case, the maximum of the second range is less than the minimum of the first range. So by checking if either of these two cases hold, we can tell if the ranges do not overlap. And then at the end, all we have to do is negate that. So for part 2, we check if the first range is entirely before the second range, or the second range is entirely before the first range. If neither of those are true, then the intervals overlap, and then we increment our answer by 1. So that's the code to tell how many assignment pairs have an overlap of ranges within those elves. So that's it for the explanations. During the actual solving for part 1, it was a bit more straightforward because all we have to do is check if two things hold, and there's two cases variations on those. For part 2, I was a bit more panicked because I didn't immediately know how to check if two ranges overlap. It took me after actually solving it to figure out the concise solution, which we have here. I ended up doing like a 4-way casework check the first time I tried to code it up. That was a bit complicated, and I did end up getting a penalty, or rather I just ended up getting a mistake and having to wait a minute to resubmit the first time. But after that, I just had the casework and it worked out, even though it wasn't that concise. So yeah, that's it for Advent of Code 2022 Day 4. Again, if you would like to join my private leaderboard, I'm going to link a code in the description. You can go check that out. Here's the code on screen in case you want to type it in, but you can copy it down below. I think it'll be pretty fun. We'll see what happens. If things go wrong, then maybe I'll end up deleting this. Anyways, if you want to see my code for Day 4, that's going to be in the GitHub repository, which is linked to in the description. It contains solutions to all of my days of Advent of Code. And that's it. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to leave it down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for Day 5. Thanks for watching.